and welcome to the Relax You're a Yoga Teacher podcast, the podcast where we take the stress out of teaching yoga because you did not get into teaching yoga to be stressed, overworked, burnt out or tired. You got into yoga to help people and spread the love of yoga. So let's get back to that. This week we're going to be talking about self-doubt. This is something that I have been asked about so much, and I think it's one of the things that is the biggest barrier when I'm doing my teacher training. Self-doubt is probably the biggest barrier for people to actually teach. And first things first, we need a little bit of self-doubt, okay? Self-doubt isn't always a bad thing. If you didn't have any self-doubt, you should probably not be a teacher. Self-doubt is going to make sure that you do your further training, that you keep up to date with your yoga practice. It means you're going to keep up to date with the current advice and studies around yoga. Self-doubt is the thing that's going to keep you on the ball. Self-doubt, however, is a problem when it is a problem. Self-doubt's a problem when it's stopping you from doing the things that you know deep down that you're ready for, but there's just too much chatter in your brain saying that you are not good enough, that you've got imposter syndrome. And I want to just say that never goes away. So when we're talking about self-doubt, I'm not going to be trying to get you to get rid of self-doubt, because like I say, it's got its place. And also, if you wait for the self-doubt to go away, you are never ever going to do the things that you want to do. Instead, we need to work out by doing. We're going to work it out in a practical way. How much self-doubt, how much anxiety can you live with? How much uncomfortable is bearable for you? Now, the analogy that I always use, and the reason why I always use this analogy is because it's something that was so difficult for me, and I think it's a really good analogy. So if you've ever learned to drive, I think learning to drive is really similar to teaching yoga. I learned to drive really late on in life. In fact, I passed my test when I was about 27, and then I got a car when I was 34. And the reason why I got my car so late is because I was terrified to drive, absolutely terrified. I did not identify myself as a driver. I did not believe that I was a driver, and I would have a physical, visceral reaction. And I would say to people, how do I stop myself being frightened when I would drive? And people would say, you drive. And I would say, well, that's not very helpful because I'm too frightened to drive. So how do I drive and not be frightened? And people would say, you drive frightened. It's really scary, and then it gets easier. And I'd get so frustrated and I'd get so angry, and I would be really, that's not helpful. How do I drive and not be frightened? And the answer would be, again, you just drive frightened, and then it goes away. And you know what? That advice was right. The only way that you are going to be able to do the thing that you're frightened of is by doing the thing that you're frightened of. The only way that you are going to get enough evidence in your brain that is going to say, do you know what, you are actually an all right yoga teacher, you do have a place here, is if you do it with the imposter syndrome. And eventually what happens is you do it so often that it that you internalize it. It becomes part of your identity. And that imposter syndrome doesn't necessarily completely go away, but it definitely eases. And then you can take the next step. So the way to do it is to start really small. So I actually did a fear of driving course, which has really helped me. And I think it just translates so well to the teaching yoga thing, because what they would make you do is you had to go and sit in your car in the driving seat, and then you had to turn the engine on, and each time you did it, so you would do it and you would do one step at a time, and every time it would be frightening, and then the next time you did it, it wouldn't be as frightening, and then the next time it wouldn't be as frightening. And so you would find your comfort zone, and you would nudge yourself a little tiny bit out of your comfort zone, and then the next time that comfort zone will grow and grow. Make sure that the class that you're going to teach is appropriate. If you've shown it to somebody who is, if you've shown it to your mentor, if you've done the research, you've done your work, there's no reason why you shouldn't be teaching that class. If the only thing that's holding you back is self-doubt, then we need to teach scared. And you will be scared. I'm scared so much when I'm teaching. There's loads of times, when I started doing my teacher training, every year when I get the new teachers in, I am terrified. When I had to move all of the syllabus from in-person to online, I was terrified. When just recently I had to teach in the class, that was a really full class, and I hadn't taught a really full class since pre-COVID because we upped the numbers we could have in the studio. I was terrified, but you get into the swing of it. You know the class that you're going to teach. It's stage fright, and stage fright is horrible, but the worst thing that happens, so let's pretend that the worst thing happens. What is the worst thing that happens when you're teaching a yoga class? That you freeze? Well, have your notes there with you. You don't need to be perfect to be a yoga teacher. In fact, students quite like it when you're vulnerable. So I'm not talking about, crying in the class or anything like that. But if you say to your class, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I'm just going to take a moment because I'm a bit nervous," nobody is even going to question that. Yoga teaching is a little bit like doing a stand-up comedy routine, but actually it's a lot easier than doing it. Not that I've done a stand-up comedy routine, but I imagine it's a lot easier than doing a stand-up comedy routine. But it is a little bit like a performance. And the students are not there to be taught by a perfect person. The students are there to have an experience where they're going into their own body and they're, relaxing, and they're having their own experience. It's not really about you. You're just there as a guide, and students really like it when you are human. And if you are nervous, it's perfectly fine to say you're nervous. It's perfectly fine to get your left and rights muddled up. It's perfectly fine for, to not be able to do that pose correctly in front of everyone. Like, it's perfectly fine for you if you've got an injury to say, "Look, I've got an injury, so I'm not going to do that today." You want to model to your students the behavior that you want to see in them. So the best way to be a yoga teacher is to embody that yoga. So being kind to yourself and being honest with yourself is really powerful. People really like it. So when we can be human, it's nothing to be frightened of. That vulnerability in being human is going to connect you to your students. And if they are looking for perfection, then maybe they're just not your student. But there is always going to be somebody who doesn't like your class. There's always going to be something that you get a little bit wrong. There's always going to be something, there's things outside of our control. There might be drilling outside. There might be, you CD, my CD. your your music might not work. Things do go wrong in a yoga class, but knowing that your job is not to micromanage your students' experience so they have a perfect class. Your job is to guide them in the act of yoga. So your job is to teach them about yoga and to share your experience of yoga with them too. So by embodying kindness to yourself, embodying, non-attachment, by embodying being able to go with the flow, things like that, that is all really powerful things that your students can learn from, rather than you beating yourself up. Because if you're standing there and you're beating yourself up and you're being really hard on yourself and you're being a perfectionist and you're not able to be kind to yourself, then you're not modeling yoga to your students. And that doesn't mean that if you have self-doubt, if you have thoughts that are unkind, or if you are a perfectionist, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be a yoga teacher. It's about how you speak about yourself and how nice you are to yourself in that space. So it's how you deal with that perfectionism. It's how you deal with that anxiety. It's a problem when it stops you from doing the things that you want to do. It's a problem when you stop yourself from having the life that you love, and being able to help the people that you want to be able to help. How do you build confidence with anything? You build confidence by doing the thing, and also by knowing that you have the experience to be doing that thing. So if you think back to a job that you've had, or something that you do that when you first started doing it you were really uncomfortable with, and now you can do it without even thinking about. The reason why you can do it now without even thinking about it is because you have that pattern in your brain that you've already done it. So when your brain thinks about how that's going to be, it already has a pattern that it can call back on. So when you're thinking about doing your job, you imagine your job day and your brain goes, has loads of experience and can tell you pretty much what that's going to be like. Your brain does not like doubt, doesn't like uncertainty. So when you imagine teaching yoga, if you're brand new to it or if you haven't done it before, it's going to give you loads of scenarios. It's not going to know what teaching yoga is like. So it's just going to give you all of the scenarios at once, which is going to be really, really overwhelming. But after you've done it for a while, you're going to be able to pull those scenarios. You're going to be able to have a pattern of how it's going to be. So the uncertain becomes not certain, because there's no such thing as certain, but the uncertain becomes predictable. Now, if you have a bump in the road, so we were talking about this in the last episode, that because it feels unsafe to teach yoga, your brain is always going to be looking for a reason to not teach it. It's always going to be looking for a reason to step back into your comfort zone. So when you have a bump in the road, your brain is going to give you all the reasons why you shouldn't be teaching yoga. Now that's going to win unless you can give it the evidence in the other way. So if you can say to yourself, no, look at all this evidence and the other side. And it might not stop the emotional side of your brain, but the logical side of your brain can kind of anchor it down. So what I would really suggest that you do is every time somebody gives you a compliment on your teaching, every time you positively affect someone, write it down. Because as I keep saying with teaching yoga and putting all of this stuff out there in the world, we only hear back a very small amount from the people who we're actually affecting in a positive way. And when someone reaches out and tells you, so if you have a compliment after a class, or if you put something on Facebook, or if you send out a newsletter and someone replies and says, "Thank you, I really needed to hear that day," write it down, remember it, take a picture of it, and have a folder or a box or something on your computer where you can go and look at it and have like a compliment file, so that you can go and look at that and go, oh my goodness, no, if I stop, there will be people who miss me. If I stopped putting out my content, if I stopped teaching, and even if it's just one person, you've made that positive change. And if you allow your self-doubt to win, then you can't help more people. I can guarantee that you're helping more people than you think. There will be people out there who you might not even know them. There'll be people who are following your Instagram. There'll be people who are on your newsletter. And if you've got a really small following, that it might just be one person, but that's one person that you've helped. Like, you might not know that person yet. If you've got a small following, you might not know the people that you're going to help, but don't stop before you've helped them because you've got self-doubt. And really examine, what are you frightened of? What when you're talking about your self-doubt, when you're talking about your perfectionism, what is the fear underneath it? So my base fear is rejection. So if I look at every single manifestation of the way that, so if I look at a lot of my destructive behaviours, if I look at the way that I talk about myself, when I unravel it, when I look back, when I peel off the layers, it's all about the fear of rejection. And so many of my destructive behaviours come back to that. So when I look at, so if I flip it and I'm like, well, who's rejecting us? Why am I acting in this way? Does it matter if those people don't like me? Really? Like, unpick, where is this self-doubt coming from? What is this perfectionism? What is this self-doubt trying to protect you from? And be thankful for it. So I don't mean like, oh, be thankful for it, like people are starving in the third world. I don't mean like that. I mean, really see that as part of your protective mechanism. So everybody has had traumas in their lives, and your body and your brain wants to protect you from having more trauma. Of course it does. You probably hurt. Everybody has something that we are trying to protect ourselves from. We all have unhealed wounds, and these are going to inform how we talk to ourselves and how we behave in the world, because our body and our brain wants to protect us. So instead of fighting with this part of yourself, having this like ongoing fight, really step back and accept it as part of us. And I'm not saying accept in the way of like, oh, just accept it. I mean, really just see it for what it is. It's part of your protective mechanism, and that it is part of you. It's not something external from you that you are fighting. It is you. And when you do that, you can really start to work with it. And I find it really useful to tap. So I do an affirmation, and this is so woo, but it really, really helps, is that I tap it. So with my fear of rejection, when I see that that's coming up again, when I see that that's preventing me from doing my life, I need to tap it. So what I do is I just tap my forehead and I say, even though some people might not like me, I still completely accept myself. And I love that. I love it. It's so, so powerful. So whatever's coming up for you, you say, even though I whatever it is, when you think about that scenario that you're frightened of, say, even though my yoga class wasn't perfect, I still completely accept myself. And you can use accept, you can use love. Even though nobody turned up to my yoga class, I still completely love and accept myself. And it's so powerful to disrupt those thoughts, but be kind to yourself. Your self-doubt is part of you. It's not something you need to fight. It's something that you're going to carry with you. We're going to have a lifelong journey with this self-doubt. So we may as well invite it along, but don't let it drive. It does not get to drive. It only gets to be a passenger. Thank you so much for listening. I haven't decided what next week's podcast is going to be about yet, but tune in. I'm sure it's going to be great. Bye, everyone. Oh, like and subscribe.